Greetings. Allow me to welcome you to For the Love of Fiction, a podcast dedicated to discussing story and character across a wide range of mediums. I am your host, Gavin Groves, and with me is my co-host, Marc Tobit.
Hello there.
Hello, mate. How's it going?
Mostly same old, man.
Mostly same old, same old. What's different?
Unfortunately, man, I've had a bit of a week.
Oh, what's happened?
Well, to put this in as brief a terms as possible, I myself am no longer a young man, would you say?
You and me both.
Oh no, I mean, sometimes I forget this. I mean, I'm in my early 40s. I've had a journey so far, and I hopefully intend to still have a long journey ahead of me. But sometimes I decide I want to live a little bit dangerously, you know?
Dangerously?
Yeah, and sometimes I think to myself, you know what? I'm going to yawn and I'm going to sneeze at the same time.
And what happened?
Well, for the better part of the last week, I've been dealing with the repercussions of that decision and thrown my back out.
Oh, that's definitely a sign of age.
Oh, very much, man. I mean, I think the medical term for the muscle I pulled is all of them, because. But last week has really been a stark reminder of what happens when your body turns against you a little bit.
See, we're all getting a bit older now. I myself at 40. Yeah, if I sleep a bit funny, oh dear.
This is it, man. I mean, to summarise, I'm getting old. It's somewhat painful, and I'm not doing it with dignity. Other than that, I'm all right, man. Same old.
Well, yeah. That's something. Like, you know, I hope that whatever chair you're sitting at right now is a comfy one.
Yep, complete with orthopedic pillows. So.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, I've got a nice gaming chair now here, so
yeah.
Raising up the old armchairs, sitting here and have a nice little conversation with you, sir. So, yes, as always, at the beginning of each episode of this podcast, me and Marc like to have a little preamble and just have a little catch-up, really, about what we've been up to, what we've been into. And I was going to say, well, do you want to go first, mate?
Oh, well, certainly. Last couple of weeks, I've been reading some books with my book club. And two specific...
Oh, tell them about your book club. Explain to our listeners what this book club is.
Well, book club seems like too much of almost an official term. Too much of an arranged thing. I mean, it's essentially me and a couple of friends. We meet up every now and again. We go down Nando's and have a cheeky Nando's. At which point we discuss whatever book we've managed to agree upon.
You pre-agree in advance, don't you?
Yeah, then we normally read it, and once we're all on the same page, like metaphorically speaking, we arrange a meal, and then we spend the meal mostly talking about what we've read and our opinions of it. And our tastes mostly overlap. We're all very much geeks in our own way, but we all do have different tastes and passions. And one thing I'll say about this book club is it has got me out of my comfort zone on more than one occasion. I've read books I otherwise would have ignored. And it's interesting sometimes to read a book that you'd never even have picked up and read the back of and suddenly find a great deal of pleasure in it. So I found it's a way to push me to areas I wouldn't normally read.
I'm not the kind of person who could ever be part of a book club.
No?
Ever. Nope. Because I have a reading list that is as long as not just my arm, my legs, and your legs and my arms combined. There's just so many books that I want to read of so many different genres. I haven't got time for someone to say to me, can you read this? Normally, when people recommend things to me, I do actually say to them, look, I will take this recommendation on board. I'll add it to my list, but don't be upset if I don't get round to it soon. You know, how many times have I said that to you over the years?
That's valid. But one thing I will say, that there is a certain pleasure in finishing a book, getting enjoyment from it, and thinking, I would never even have touched this book if it hadn't been for someone else turning around and saying, oh, I've heard about this one. And like the fact it is not even hyped to you. It is just a random book because none of us have read these books prior. It is just purely just skimming through. Normally, the best way in which to go about it is to go through the Hugo or the Nebula Awards, like over the last couple of years, see which books have like hit multiple awards.
Well, that's relevant to what I'll be discussing. Ironically, yep. So,
but the two books I read recently, even were Ned Bowman's Venomous Lumpsucker and Agustina Bazterrica's Tender is the Flesh, which are two somewhat into the future stories. One comical, one very stark. Now, the Venomous Lumpsucker refers more to the concepts of extinction and how the world would cope with the concept of multiple species being wiped out in regularity, even more so than what we see today. wherein an economy springs up around it, where countries can purchase extinction credits to justify the loss of creatures in the face of expansion. And it's got very much a Ben Elton feel to it, in terms of it's very much a satirical take on society and how even the most horrendous things can be normalized and even, in some cases, celebrated, for want of a better term. How people will often, the new norm becomes so normal that you don't realize the horrendousness of what's happening, that entire species are being wiped out. And it does analyze the beauty of evolution. And if a creature that's been evolving for hundreds of thousands of generations is wiped out before humans even discover it, has anything of beauty even been lost? And it's all told with a very comedic edge on it, but there is still a very dark message there. Whilst the other one, Tender is the Flesh, is a much more upfront, much more brutal story of which society decides to create a subspecies of humans that are known as cattle. And that they're eaten due to the fact that animals and livestock in general, the conventional livestock anyway, is no longer viable to eat because of a horrendous plague. I'm going to be honest, both these books hit me in two different ways. I mean, I imagine this has happened to you on multiple occasions, but with Tender as the Flesh is the kind of book where you get to the end of it and you just slowly close the book and you find yourself just almost staring off into the distance for a good 30 seconds to a minute.
Well,
just
that's a sign of a good book, mate.
Yeah, this one was a real gut punch. It was very... there were a lot of observations on the meat industry, funnily enough, which is something that is very heavily sort of like implied all the way through.
When was this released?
It's a very recent book. I've actually got on the side here. I'll see what date I've got inside here.
The reason why I say this is because in the last 10, 15 years, there has been like a movement towards dystopian / science fiction that is focused around global warming and like resource, intensive scenarios, let's say.
Well, that is a very real threat these days, isn't it?
Exactly. Yes.
2017.
Yeah, it's very new.
So it's also, I believe it wasn't actually written in English originally, which
oh right, okay.
I believe it was. I mean, the author is Brazilian, and it is. I found some interest in reading some books that were originally published in other countries. I'm curious about what transfers in the whatever to English. If certain terminologies can be lost or anything, but this book actually flowed very well. But other than that, that's just pretty much mostly what I've been enjoying of late, man.
Okay. Well, I recently read The Wind-Up Girl, 2009 biopunk dystopian novel by Paolo Bacigalupi. I think that's how you say his name. I'm really sorry if I've murdered that. But yeah, just like the novel you just mentioned, this is has similar fears. Let's say it's set in a future Thailand, concerned with global warming and biotechnology. It won a lot of awards, as you were mentioning a minute ago. It won the Nebula and the Hugo, actually tied with China Miéville's The City and the City, which I think is a superior novel. And this novel, I was disappointed with it, actually. Very disappointed with it. On another great podcast that I listened to, Geek's Guide to the Galaxy, it was, they really talked it up on there. And I don't know. Yeah, it has got something very interesting to say about women being submissive to men. Like there's a character in it, the wind-up girl, the titular wind-up girl, is like a fembot, let's say, who is designed to want to please men. And there are circumstances where she is put in situations with men who request things and she is forced to do it. She doesn't understand why. It's because of her programming. And it's interesting in that regard. And the world itself is quite interesting. The world building, there's like these because there's not much in the way of resources, so science and technology has had to evolve. I remember there being this sequence where they got these like genetically engineered like elephants that are like powering this factory. It was quite interesting, but unfortunately the characters are not. And I may have mentioned this before in a previous podcast. I'll probably mention it again in the future one. If your characters don't leap off the page and are not interesting, and the world building is too intensive, it's just going to read like a Wikipedia entry, right?
Absolutely. The characters are what make the world turn.
Yeah, that's right. I feel like with this novel, shame. It's a shame.
Yeah.
But talking about books with poor characters, we're going to go to another book that has got great characters. I've may have said this to you before, Mark, that I was always against audiobooks because I felt they were cheating. Let's say I ended up with a free account, like a free month, let's say, with Audible. As you know, with Audible, you get a free credit. And I decided that, you know what, there's a book I've always wanted to read. It's really, really long. He overwrites for the most part. And I figured that the best way to consume this story would be to listen to it while multitasking. And that is Stephen King's It. You've read this one?
Once, long ago.
How old were you when you read it?
I was in my teens.
Oh, so really? Long time ago.
That was it, like 20 years ago, yeah.
Wow. Do you remember much of it?
I remember a fair bit. I mean, I'm going to be honest.
You've had the film since, haven't you? So
that's the one that set my impression of the story of it more than anything else. The Tim Curry specifically, I just want to emphasize that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I even made a point of not too long ago watching those new ones, and they're reasonably good as well. Like,
yeah.
I mean, it's because the original story is a good story. So
it is, yeah. I saw the TV series first, and to me, and many people of my age, that TV series is iconic. Because of Tim Curry. I do think that Stephen King is very, very good at capturing like a certain era of youth. Like with The Body / Stand By Me as well, the teenagers in that, like the lingo, the narrative storytelling, there's just something about how he captures the essence of that kind of youthful storytelling in the voice.
Not quite innocence, but something close to it.
Oh, kids are not innocent, are they? There are all kinds of no good, you know.
There's still that nice like naivety when it comes to the more adult aspects.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm halfway through this now, and yes, you could probably cut a lot out of it. There have been points where I've not been listening. That's all. But I mean, maybe that's because I know the story already because of the film, the TV miniseries. I've not seen the new film yet. So, like, I can sort of afford to not pay attention to all of it. But there is something that I've picked up on, actually, that I have to say, it's a bit of a critique on it, because I do like the story overall, but I'm seeing the through line in the narrative now. It's very much about the fear of children, isn't it? And how, as children, when we are like naked to the dangers of the world, aren't we? And all danger is magnified when we are children. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
You know, that's how comes we're not supposed to watch horror movies. You know, that's why we have nightmares when we're kids. And as we get older,
you become jaded and cynical. The fear doesn't get as deep.
And maybe we have a better grasp on reality. And there's that idea in this story, isn't it, where as kids, that obviously there's a fair amount in the narrative that's to do with child killing, paedophilia, you know, with Pennywise, the child killer. That's that. But the way that the kids are seeing all this happen and no one else really knows anything about it, and then when they are adults, when Pennywise returns, they've all forgotten what's happened, sort of comments on how adults don't really seem to understand the nature of horror as a child, which I think is really interesting. I really like that idea. It's very smart. It's very clever. You know, like a group of kids maybe going into a park and seeing the bullies from school. That was scary as a kid. I'm sure you had something like that happen to you. I certainly did. But as an adult, you don't think anything like that ever. But to go along with that, I dislike King's use of the horror tropes, because Pennywise is a shape-shifting character, isn't he? In the TV miniseries, he shape-shifts 1 or 2 times, maybe 3 times, probably more than that. But specifically what I'm referring to is the use of the Universal Studios horror characters, like the Gill Man, Frankenstein, Dracula, the werewolf. I feel like maybe he was like paying tribute to like the classics. He often likes to pay tribute to pop culture. He loves a bit of Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, it doesn't work for me. You know, it doesn't work for me.
You better take you out the story a little bit.
No, the clown's scarier. Pennywise is always scarier, forever scarier. Maybe that's because of Tim Curry, and that's because when I read it, or listen to it, should I say, it's Steven Weber performing it, and he's fantastic. You know, it's always Tim Curry in my head, and that's scary.
Yeah, just seeing him peeking up from that drain. It stays like they all float.
They all float. It's all that great stuff is in the book.
Yeah,
you know, so all of it. But yeah, so I will report back with that when I finished it because I want more. I've heard stuff about the ending. I have heard that the ending has yet to be done accurately on screen. So
they will never do the ending on screen because there are certain elements.
Don't spoil. Do not spoil.
I won't say anything more then. But other than that,
what I know is that everyone says something horrible. So I do know there's like an orgy scene. I know that, but I don't know its relevance to the end.
That was kind of what I was alluding to. Yeah, That's why I don't think it will ever be accurately portrayed in that regard.
Well, we'll see about the actual. Well, that's not at the ending because at the end of the TV miniseries, they've got that big spider thing. I read somewhere at the end of the new films, he just becomes big, which is probably is that right?
Something to that tune, yes.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll see anyway. I'm looking forward to it anyway because that concept he touches on, I only know about it because the TV miniseries, the Deadlights, is really interesting, and I remember reading a Wikipedia entry a long time ago about it. So I will report back. And anyway, I have a third item on my list. Mm-hmm. This is sort of a alternative mention. I recently played through the DLC for Xenoblade Chronicles 2 on Switch. It's called Torna The Golden Country. Now, I know that you yourself have been partial to your JRPG over the years.
Less so in recent decade or so, but I did have a certain love of them back in the day, yes.
Me too. That I'm in a similar position as you, is that because of anime as well, I became extremely tired of anime/Japanese storytelling tropes. Really tired of it.
They're all so much the same.
That's because they're all the same. That's right. I mean, if you watch it for that, you watch it for that. It's fine. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I stopped playing JRPGs as well. I don't know what the last one was I played before I played Xenoblade 1. But yeah, the Xenoblade series is an interesting one. I don't want to talk too much about it right now because it's definitely something I want to touch on more in depth in a future episode because this series reignited my passion for JRPGs. I mean, I wouldn't say like I'm a super JRPG head. I'm certainly not, I quote, a weeb, that's for sure. But the original Xenoblade, which came out on Wii, had a certain Western sensibility to its storytelling. It was mature, very, very mature, not overacted, and not too melodramatic. Let's say it had its moments, but compared to like a lot of Japanese, storytelling, and it just had this brilliant concept about like in the world of Xenoblade 1 anyway, because it's a different story each time. The characters exist on another creature. They are basically like bacteria on a humongous creature, and you have you have the Bionis and you have the Mechonis, and the main character's city hometown is like on the Bionis leg, and they are tiny human beings, obviously, and the story sort of takes them across this giant creature that is frozen in time. And then onto the other creature. And this idea of like giant creatures and humans living on it sort of carries over to 2. So, yeah, I'd say this deal, it is, honestly, it is brilliant. It's a brilliant concept. And in Xenoblade 2, they sort of pull this out even further and they have lots of smaller monsters that represent continents. So if you can imagine it, because this game is really famous for the scope of its environments, massive, giant, explorable canvases, and you're walking through this forest and you look up and you can see the head of the monster moving as it's moving around because you're on it. It's really interesting. The second one is a bit more, let's say, anime-esque. But there was one idea that I wanted to actually mention to you that I think you'd find quite interesting because it sort of references JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Star Wars Crusaders. So, one of the core themes of this second game is about the bonds and the connections that we form with each other. And basically, the human characters, they have this, not just human, there's various races, they have this ability to join with these, let's say, spiritual creatures like stands in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. They are called blades. And when a person joins with a blade, they become the blade driver. And this blade then sort of, you hold their weapon and the blade sort of powers you and can fight with you at the same time. And the story really is about the growth of the characters and how they relate to these blades over time and how they grow. You know, this is a creature that is with you forever, and you know where they are. Like, you get the impression that in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Stardust Crusaders that the stands have some free will, don't they?
Yeah.
But they don't stand there and talk to you like human beings. Like,
no, it's just more an implication of emotion. So.
That's why I'm saying. And the blades in this do talk to you. They do have their own ideas. They do have a degree of free will. They have their own designs. Obviously, it's all very anime and whatnot. But more importantly, they are characters in their own right. And one of the most interesting aspects of this story is that when a driver dies, the blade returns to their larval state, which is like a rock. And then when they are awakened by their next driver, they completely forget their previous life every time.
Huh.
And that sort of really like creates this drama, this conflict about the nature of memory and the importance of memory and how it makes us who we are. A couple of the characters in the story actually have taken to writing and keeping notebooks so they can remember their past. It's really quite something. It's quite something. These are great games, and I've really fallen in love with them over the last couple of years. And completing this DLC, which is like a prequel story, means I finally completed the complete narrative arc of Xenoblade 2 now, and it's good stuff. It's good stuff. I'm looking forward to playing the third one. Really looking forward to playing the third one very, very soon. So
yeah.
So yeah. I'd definitely like to talk about it in further detail at some point with you, because I think you'd be really interested in some of the finer details of the narratives in these games, because they're very smart. So anyway, was there anything else you wanted to add there? Any other experiences?
No, not as such yet. I'll keep you updated on the status of my bag, though.
Fair enough, mate. Okay, then. So we're going to jump into a break there. And when we come back, I'm going to run Marc down, educate him on the life of the namesake of this episode, the author, Cormac McCarthy. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the podcast. Marc, are you ready to talk about Cormac McCarthy?
Oh, I'm all ears, man.
You will be for this bit. So yeah, I'm just going to give a rundown of the man's early life. He was born Charles Joseph McCarthy on July the 20th, 1933 in Providence, Rhode Island, USA. So the reason why, aside from the fact that McCarthy is one of my all-time favorite authors, the reason why I've decided to do this special is because he died this year. He died on June 13th, 2023. So he was raised in Tennessee, and he studied at the University of Tennessee in 1959, where a professor asked him to repunctuate a collection of 18th century essays. This will be relevant later, Marc. Trust me. Well, actually, you don't have to trust me. You've read his work. So, you know. He joined the Air Force in 1953 and was stationed in Alaska, where he read widely. This is where much of the germination of his interest in literature, I imagine, happened. He eventually majored in English in 1957. He changed his name to Cormac to avoid comparison with the ventriloquist Edgar Bergen's dummy, Charlie McCarthy. Apparently, this was also a family nickname. Have you ever heard of Edgar Bergen, by chance?
I'm not familiar.
I mean, are ventriloquists even a thing today?
There's one or two that are still kind of on the fringe of mainstream, but they are kind of...
Feels like a dying...
Yeah.
A dead art, maybe. I don't know. I could be wrong.
It's been fading out for decades, so...
Vintage, isn't it? It's vintage.
Yeah.
So he married fellow student Lee Holman in 1961. They had a son, Colin. Lee filed for divorce when McCarthy requested she get a day job as well as look after their son so he could focus on writing. I sympathize with McCarthy because I know what it's like to want to write all the time. I also kind of feel bad, really, because it kind of reminded me of possibly, I might have prioritized writing over the years in relationships. That makes me a bad person, right? I guess.
Not a bad person, just an overly passionate one. I ask you, at this point, was he actually making money from his career, or was it still like more of a...
So, when they... No. He, like, spent a long time working on a lot of stuff, and he didn't really see great returns until much later in life.
I see.
So... But you threw me off the cuff there. I forgot what I was going to say.
My apologies.
I was going to say that, like, in dating and stuff, I always put that I'm a writer on my profiles and stuff. So I feel like it's important. Like, you need to know that I'm a writer, and being a writer is kind of like a cross to bear at the same time as being a hobby. You know, I write, therefore I am, and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's painful, it's horrible, it's awful, but at the same time, it's incredibly fulfilling at the same time. So, we're going to get onto his writing now. So, in 1965, he published The Orchard Keeper. This is an odd one. So, it's dense and a bit boring, in my opinion. I found it to be rife with style over substance writing. It has an intriguing plot when you look at it, or look at the synopsis. But his prose are just so dense and stodgy. I found it a chore to get through. It's one to return to, I think, later in life. And I remember thinking at the time, it reminded me of William Faulkner at his worst. You know, just, I imagine, well, I don't imagine, I know being a writer, and I'm sure you know this as well, Mark. Like, well, let me ask you actually, what is like one of the earliest mistakes that like burgeoning writers make when they first start writing prose? What can you?
I think that they kind of dress it up almost too much. They're in such a hurry to put so much on the page. They need to think about what can be left behind. I mean, a good example for me is Pratchett.
Yeah.
Wherein his first couple of books are very difficult to penetrate by comparison to later books where he truly hits his stride. Because he realizes that it doesn't need to all be on the page.
Yes, this is a very important lesson, actually, that I myself am kind of applying more and more to my work. Stating the obvious is a bad thing, yes, but also it's I was going to say that a lot of writers make the mistake of overcomplicating their prose. You know, it's easier to write lofty, dense, mud-like prose when you first start, I find, than it is to write something simplistic and readable. And I think maybe he overcompensated with this one. So, in 1968, he released Outer Dark. Now, McCarthy will be very famous for some of his dark stories. This one especially is not one to recommend to your mother to read, that's for sure. It's about a woman who bears her brother's baby. And Carla, the baby, leaves the nameless baby to die in the woods. The story is about Brimfeet, the mother who sets out to find the baby. It's dark, it's shocking, but it's also actually kind of thrilling. I would recommend it if you could handle the subjects. It's really concerned with themes of sin and consequence, which from this point on, and somewhat in The Orchard Keeper, become a commonality in McCarthy's work. But I would definitely say that this is where his later style starts to germinate. He starts to find his voice. He starts to become more readable. And this continues on in Child of God, which he released in 1973. And this is about a serial killer and is concerned, again, with the nature of man and morality, dark, thrilling stuff. Both of these books, I kind of feel like, are brother and sister projects. They sort of, I wouldn't say necessarily cover the same ground, but are like of the American Gothic. You know, and are dark and concerned with the evils of man, the things that he thinks in the shadows. So, but they're both quite short, quite easy, quite readable. The next one is Sutri, which I only read recently, which he released in 1979. It's semi-autobiographical and features multiple timelines. It's a tale of a man's life, is dark and oddly humorous. It kind of reminded me of John Steinbeck's work, especially of Mice and Men. There's like a simple character in it, much like, is it Lenny in Of Mice and Men? The brother who's a bit So you had to kind of be warned. If you find that humor at the expense of a simple person to be, insulting, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this book. However, his command of, as I mentioned in one of the previous episodes, semantic fields is incredible. Like the atmosphere, he absolutely is. It's like set in the mid 20th century, and he captures
the era,
the dirt and the dank of the poor areas of a middle America with incredible skill. Incredible. When I think of this book, that's what I think of. I think of the grime. Is very powerful. But it's a good one. It's a good one. Bit long, I would say. But then after this, it was Blood Meridian, which we'll be discussing in the next segment, in 1985, which was published. And then his next book was not published until 1992. This was the start of the Border trilogy. All the Pretty Horses in 92, The Crossing in 94, and Cities of the Plain in 1998. This is an epic Western coming-of-age drama about two young boys, or two young cowboys, book one being about one, book two being about the other, and then their lives correlate in book three. I was a bit disappointed with book three personally, because I found it overly simplistic thematically compared to the first two, but the first two are absolutely brilliant books. Oddly funny actually as well. Definitely where McCarthy's modern style of writing begins. If someone was to say to me, I want to read McCarthy, where should I start? I would probably say the Border trilogy. Really. Maybe a book we're going to discuss later as well, but this is probably more accessible than the other books that we're going to discuss. It's expertly written and perfectly hits that middle ground of the sparse style that he would use in his later novels and the dense, descriptive nature of the previous works. Like in Blood Meridian, the way he describes the American West, there are moments of incredible beauty. So yeah, I thoroughly recommend all three of these. So yeah, the next book is No Country for Old Men, 2006, which we will be discussing alongside the film adaptation in the final segment of this podcast. And then next it was 2006, The Road. Have you read this one, Mark? I can't remember if you've read it.
I haven't read it, but I believe I've seen the movie, yeah.
You've seen the movie. So I'll ask for your thoughts on the movie in a second after I just give this quick rundown. This is a post-apocalyptic novel about the journey of a father and his son. It won a lot of awards. It put McCarthy on the map late in his life, you could say. The film adaptation, obviously, was successful.
Was that the one that had Viggo in it?
Viggo, that's right. Viggo Mortensen. Yeah, it's one of the things he did after Lord of the Rings. So maybe his success in Lord of the Rings might have contributed to this film getting exposure. I don't know, but then him appearing on Oprah Winfrey during daytime TV probably contributed to that as well.
That's one thing I'll give credit to Viggo is that after Lord of the Rings, he very much did pick and choose his projects.
He did, yes, because he's an actor's actor. Like his stuff with David Cronenberg, I'd love to do a David Cronenberg episode. Actually, thinking about it is sublime.
So the fact that he chose to do a movie like this kind of lends weight to the story itself.
Yes, definitely. It's something of a fable. It's biblical in nature. Possibly McCarthy's most perfect novel. Overall, I would say it's not my favorite. But it's definitely up there. It's the first one I read of his because Viggo Mortensen was in this film, and because I like post-apocalyptic stuff, and I saw the trailer and I was like, I've got to see this. The reviews were incredible. I thought, do you know what? I've got to read the book first. I do try to go about it that way, and this is the first time I was introduced to McCarthy's style, which was a shock to say the least. Which I'll bring up pretty soon. But yeah, it's beautiful. It's got a beautiful ending. It deals with parenthood, the feelings that a mother and father have for their child. I don't understand that myself completely because I'm not a parent, and neither are you, Mark? But I can imagine that.
Not as far as I know.
Not well, yeah. So not yet. So but yeah, it's incredibly poignant and beautiful, and very scary. actually, because do you remember who the villains are in this book, or the threat in this book, Mark?
Was it the other roving humans?
It's just other roving humans. That's right. It's a post-apocalyptic world.
It's not like there's a big bad or anything hunting them or anything.
Or zombies.
Yeah,
it's like humans that have pretty much become cannibals.
Yeah, it's not evil, more desperation that's causing that. I do remember there being scenes of utter anxiety.
Oh, when they're hiding.
Yes, in the bunkers. Could have been a good example, yeah.
Oh, God. But it's a beautiful looking film as well, is it not? I just remember like destroyed trees and forestry and it just looking like incredible.
Am I right in remembering that you don't even really get an explanation for why the world is like that?
No, you don't. I can't remember if you do in the book. I hope not, because you don't need it. It's not important. Yeah. That's something that will be alluded to a lot about McCarthy. He's very good at choosing information like that. We don't need to know really where Anton Chigurh or Josh Holden come from, do we? Or it's not important, is it? They're there.
If anything, it's like I say the Joker. I mean, that's changed in recent years, but characters like that are far more interesting when you don't know the circumstances that created them.
And it's the same, and Alien obviously as well. It's the same with events like this. You don't know. So one thing I did want to add actually that I thought was always quite funny is that he was on Oprah Winfrey talking about it on her book club section, and about the book touched a lot of people in America. Not bad for a man who mainly writes about nihilism, murder, incest, and rape. To be honest, joke. It's not just that. So but his last two novels, which were released in the last couple of years, 2022, should I say, both released in 2022, The Passenger and Son of Mares, I've not read yet. And the reason why I've not read them yet is because I had no idea about them, because he didn't release anything for years, as far as I know, prose fiction wise, and then suddenly he died this year. I thought, oh bloody hell! I've not read anything by him new since The Road. I should have a look. And I was like, 2 books in 2022.
He's a very sporadic releaser from the sounds of things. So
it's the intense research he puts into things, from what I've read.
Yeah.
So yeah, both of these books are about the atomic bomb, supposedly. So yeah. But yeah, so I did want to just sort of mention his style, because it is something that comes up a lot in Blood Meridian and No Country for Old Men, and we may well discuss it in those segments, but as a heading, and to quote him, just want to mention that he used punctuation incredibly sparingly, which was something that was alien to me at the time. He often even replaced commas with and, which I quote has been referred to as the most important word in McCarthy's lexicon. It's also a trademark of many other classic American authors, such as Ernest Hemingway. They loved a run-on sentences. Just and. And truth be told, I like a run-on sentence as well. I like to read an author that goes, do you know what? I don't care about these rules. I'm going to put and here instead. I'm not even going to use a comma here. I'm not going to put and here because it's important to the voice of this narrative. He actually told Oprah Winfrey Marc that he preferred simple, declarative sentences, which is interesting because, in my opinion, it greatly links him to Hemingway's ideas of writing, because Hemingway was obsessed with speaking the truth when writing. And when I say the truth, I mean that every single sentence that he ever composed, he meant it, and that you believed it. And I suppose in this regard, it sort of links him with that word to declare. He's declaring the story. He has this way of making the story seem really important.
Yeah.
Not shouting,
but more of a statement of truth, as you say.
More than a statement of truth. It gives it this biblical quality. When was the last time you read the Bible, Mark?
I haven't read that since I was in my young teens.
Well, you see, I have read it on and off over the years. I'm not a religious person, as I mentioned before, and I've read one of more. I can't bother to dig it out now, but I have read a recent translation, and it's very similar. Almost every sentence is like a declaration of what is you are being told is the truth, and that's very similar to the style of writing that McCarthy uses, especially with The Road. Especially with The Road. He also hated quotation marks. Seeing them as just this thing that blocked the page, with, I quote, weird little marks, which I think is probably to do with how he edited that essay for his tutor, which apparently he stripped out all of the punctuation in that. How did you feel, Mark, when you first read McCarthy? I believe it was Blood Meridian.
Yeah.
How did you find
it? Was a little bit of a shock to the system. I mean, I've always been more reader of authors that follow the classic rules of like literature. Yeah. Not to say that they're archaic or anything like that. It's just everyone has their own style, and McCarthy was a little ways removed from anything I'd read before in terms of that concept of writing.
Yes.
It took me a little while to turn my mind to a slight angle to be able to take it in the right way.
Yeah. Hopefully, we're not repeating ourselves here, by the way, so otherwise I'm going to have to edit this all out. But I'm going to have to say, just in case, is that like a great writer is able to shift narrative voice in dialogue and make it different from the narrator. And a great writer can do that. If they can do that, then the reader should be able to tune their voice, and you just sort of. Plus, obviously, yes, that's the right way to put it. Plus, there are basic rules that he does follow. Like when a new speaker speaks, it's a new paragraph, for example, a new line and whatnot. So you do sort of get into the flow of it. But it's all about that word choice and that narrative voice and tone, isn't it?
Yeah.
A great author, who wrote some incredible work and easily up there with my favourites. It's interesting how his work ethic changed over time. As you could say earlier on, as I mentioned, his earlier work is overly complex like Faulkner. And later on, he sort of veers more towards Hemingway's simplistic style. I'm not sure if I mentioned it on a previous podcast, but like I've probably told you before about like the war of words that McCarthy and Hemingway had like in the press, when they were both like active in the early 20th century. When Faulkner would say, I actually wrote about this for an assignment, how Faulkner would critique Hemingway for, writing like a baby, writing so simplistically that a child could write it. And then Hemingway would say, well, I can say what Faulkner says in a paragraph in one sentence. Oh, imagine it sniping at each other like that. Men's manly men. So
sometimes rivalry brings the best sort of like out of two people.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's like a quick overview of the man himself. It should be mentioned that he did do a lot of research for his stuff. Pretty sure, if my notes are correct, I'll be going over that a little bit when we discuss Blood Meridian, which is in the next segment. So, yes, thanks for listening, Mark. I've wanted to get that off my chest for a while.
I could feel that, man, seriously.
We're going to ride off to the sunset of breaks and catch you in a bit. Welcome back to the podcast. In this next segment, I'm going to be discussing with Mark Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, or The Evening Redness in the West. So, Mark, this novel, I should start with how I discovered this novel. It was After the Road, as I mentioned earlier on, was the first book that I read by McCarthy, and then I just read the No Country, and then heard that it was this was often regarded as one of his greatest work, I suppose, leading up to The Road and No Country. And I can actually remember exactly where I was when I finished it. My reaction was so strong. I was like in the office in the bungalow when I was with Katie, and I remember actually going on Facebook and just. Because I just had to say something, in an outward status, and I just had to ask, what the fuck did I just read? Would you say that your reaction was quite similar to that when you read it?
Oh, very much so, because you reading it actually was a domino effect to me reading it.
Yeah.
And what I actually did is I proposed it to my book club at the time. Which
yes.
A couple of years back now, and Yeah, there were a couple of sort of like slightly haunted looks at each other at the next meeting.
Yeah, well, I remember you saying to me that you wanted to get them out of their comfort zone a little bit.
I didn't realise that, man.
If ever there was a novel that was to nudge anyone out of their comfort zone, this is it. But yes, to give you a very quick summary, this is a book about violence, about misogyny. It's self-serious, unfun, you could say. It's a Western, but technically it's more of an anti-Western. Some call it one of the greatest American novels. Others call it the great American novel. None of it hyperbolic, in my opinion. I'd probably agree with all of that, really. But yeah, this one is it's set on the American frontier. Third person, omniscient narrator. But the narrator doesn't always divulge the faults of the characters. We have to trust in the dialogue and the actions that the narrator tells of in order for us to interpret who these characters really are. Some people would critique this novel as being impersonal. I suppose you could say unemotional. There's not enough of a deep dive into the characters' emotions and their reactions. In the end, they do come across almost as robotic in their actions. Would you agree with that, actually, Mark? When you look back at some of the extreme violence in the novel, does it not feel
very almost jaded to the insanity that's around them?
Absolutely. There's a mixture of past and present tense. And sometimes the narrator also does not divulge information, likely because it is irrelevant to the narrative. You know, I seem to remember him talking about a poet at some point, and the narrator just says a poet that is long lost. We don't need to know who the poet is.
It doesn't change the tone, yeah.
No, it's more about what is being recited. But yes, this narrator, he describes the violence in a matter-of-fact style. I don't want to say that it is in incredible detail, just in a very direct, simplistic, method. McCarthy would do this a lot. Ironically, he does this in the book version of No Country for Old Men. It's simple prose, let's say, versus, ironically, as I'm listening at the moment, to Stephen King. You know, there's a passage in it where one of the characters is being eaten by the gill man, right? Do you remember that in the film, Mark, or the book?
Yeah.
And it like goes on and on. And literally, McCarthy describes in a matter-of-fact way. This is something I'll come back to later when we talk about No Country for Old Men. But I should mention the absolutely overlong paragraph that describes the attack of the Apaches. This is incredibly gory. You know, he uses run-on sentences, so no commas. Just he uses and. That's it. And this, they did this, and they did this, and they did this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and it creates like a sense of flow in the narrative pace, like this charge, this giant form of multiple savages, as they're often referred to. It's like a force of nature, just going across the horizon. And, they're like covered in tattoos and whatever. And it's just... But the extreme violence in this novel, I must say, is not for everyone. Many of the criticisms labelled this novel are because of it. I don't know if you remember the Tree of Dead Babies, Mark.
I think I might suppress that, man. Yeah, that's stirring up something. It's been a couple of years since I read the novel, but there are some things that...
The swinging of the baby. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
That is...
Doubling to the purpose again. There we are.
Oh, it's so horrific. It's awful.
I will be honest, there were a couple of moments when... Because this book is very, very far removed from what my taste said, which I've previously established in this pod.
Mm-hmm.
It is so far removed. I mean, what little humour there is in this book is not my kind of humour.
It's dark.
Yeah.
It's dark. I think we'll get to him in a minute. I think most of the humour is more surrounding the judge.
Yeah.
But we'll discuss him in a minute. But was this obviously this is the first of his works that you read, so this is the first time you experienced his refusal to use quotation marks for dialogue.
Yeah.
As well.
You have to kind of rearrange your mind a little bit whilst you're reading to get into it, based on all the previous rules you might have had from reading other books.
Mm-hmm. I say I find you get into it after a while. I find you get into the flow of it. But the protagonist of this novel, if we can call him he's not a good guy. I suppose he is the focus of the narrative, isn't he? He's a character known only as the Kid. And, one could critique McCarthy in this novel for his lack of characterization. We were discussing world building versus plot, weren't we, in a previous episode? And I think characterization versus plot versus world building also is a worthy discussion. The Kid is essentially a bad person who runs away from home because he's a bad person. And just ends up being embroiled in these series of even more violent events that escalate more and more and more. I don't think it's really important what the Kid likes to have for breakfast, what he likes to do with his spare time, his general demeanor and whatnot. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, to a degree, he is a little bit of a cipher for the reader.
I disagree with that.
The reason I feel that is because compared to some of the other characters in this story, he is much less. I mean, you're kind of witnessing the characters through his eyes at times, along with the narrator and everything.
Yes, in that regard, yes, okay. A cipher to view the story. The narrator, though, in this story, because he is third person, distant, omniscient, he doesn't go into the feelings of the characters at all. And it's like, for me personally, he is the narrator is witnessing the story. He's like an invisible follower who just watches what happens and just reports it as he sees it. The Kid, when we discuss the themes of the novel overall, I think, when we say a cipher in terms of protagonist, when I say cipher, I think more like Harry Potter, in the sense that he's a character for the narrator to insert themselves into and to embody in the narrative. Could you say that you embodied the Kid in this novel?
Well, no.
That's what I mean. It's different. Yeah. It's different. There's a real sense of distance between the narrative perspective and the action that's unfolding in front of you. If you were to, maybe it's because there is a lack of emotional resonance. There's a lack of free range discourse. Monologues. It's it's hard to connect with these characters. And I think that's probably one of the most important things for a reader to do, to be able to transport themselves into a character, because you need to identify with them. And we can't identify with anyone in this book. Anyone.
No, some of them, or most of them, are irredeemable.
All of them. They're all of them. They're all awful. They're awful. Awful. But yes, so the Kid, you have the Glanton gang, the actual gang that he joins. They're a group of scalpers who massacred indigenous Americans, Indians, whatever you want to call them. And then, of course, we have the Judge, Judge Holden, probably the most iconic figure in this book. Like this is something else I'll be mentioning when we discuss No Country. I think it's great that we managed to tie both of these great works into this episode. Is that with the Judge and with Anton Chigurh, McCarthy has crafted two of the greatest villains in the history of literature for me personally. What do you remember of the Judge specifically? Not plot details, but characterization. Can you remember anything?
Yeah, the thing I remember about the Judge is that he's a man who, from the moment they meet him, he has a presence of intimidation and violence, even when he's simply talking. And at first you think he is just a violent man, but he's smarter than that. You actually realize he's a deeply intelligent person.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow that makes him all the scarier.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He commands every scene that he's in, simply by virtue of the fact that it's not that he's forcing his way to be the main person of the scene. He simply is.
Yes, he is like a force of nature, I suppose, in that regard, as I was alluding to earlier on. I think McCarthy genuinely is a genius when it comes to the depiction and characterization of his villains and his antagonists. The judge is depicted as hairless, isn't he? Completely bald and hairless, often naked, and pale skinned in the West. As you mentioned, incredibly intelligent. And I think that one of the ways that he gets this across is through how confident and articulate his dialogue is. He is a man of reflection and analysis, but incredible arrogance at the same time. He commands presence, as you say, by commenting on what he sees, and he speaks almost a different language to everyone else. He's a man of education through the action of the narrative, and it was also shown that he's also a man of worldly experience, isn't he?
Yes.
Because we'll get to it when we talk about the plot for a bit. But the opening scene, when you first see him, when he accuses that preacher of raping children and goats, and he rallies the audience to attack and maim this preacher. This is a character who relishes in chaos.
Yes.
And he has power over the hearts and minds of men because of... I don't want to say it's because of who he potentially embodies thematically. I think it's because he's just so much more evolved than everyone else in this story.
Well, you say he's reflective, and he's intelligent. He's a well-versed, well-travelled man, and it's almost like his thoughts and reflections have led to him to ascend above most morals.
Yes, this is what I was just about to say. He's defined by his own moral code. He has his own weird, fucked up moral code that he must abide, like Anton Chigurh in No Country for Old Men. Just an absolutely fascinating character to read and to unravel and to wonder, and not someone I'd ever like to meet, ever. So, yeah, I'll give a quick rundown on the plot. So, as mentioned earlier on, the kid runs away. He falls in with the army, and during an unauthorized invasion of Mexico, the army is destroyed and the kid is imprisoned, and this is where he is set free to ride with the Granton gang of scalp hunters contracted by the government to hunt the Apaches, who are, making things more difficult, let's say. And what is harrowing is that over the course of the novel, this gang becomes so obsessed with murder and making money that they start killing innocent people, don't they? It doesn't matter whether they're Indians or not. They start raiding villages. It's just literally... The book is called the Evening Redness in the West. And I don't know what it is, but it just kind of gives me this image of, obviously red meaning blood, but like this mist, this red mist that just literally pollutes and collides with everything across the frontier, poisoning and destroying everything in its path. These human beings are just absolutely controlled by the violence, and all of it is like explicitly detailed in that matter-of-fact language that McCarthy uses throughout the novel. It is absolutely not for the faint of heart. It really isn't. But one thing I will say actually about the writing in this novel is that he does paint a beautiful picture of the West at times. He really goes into great detail to set the scene, to describe the deserts, you could say, the skies,
the plains,
the plains is the word. That's right. The plains, the American plains, the American canvas. Let's say that this painting of violence is splattered upon. Let's say, but yeah, there's that great scene, isn't there, as we were talking about Judge Holden's intelligence, where it's recounted that he first meets the Glanton gang when they are running away from an Apache attack, and somehow he knows that they are out of gunpowder, and it's not explained how he knew they were there. He's just sat there, isn't he? Just minding his own business, waiting for them, and that's unsettling, isn't it? That's incredibly unsettling. And he creates gunpowder using various natural resources, and if I remember correctly, urine. And then
it almost alludes to the idea of him being almost a devil.
Yeah,
who's waiting for them at a crossroads and then makes magic with fire and brimstone. It's just
that's what I was getting to earlier on with the themes. I think that it is, he talks about how he's like out of time in the novel in a very vague way. You could easily interpret such dialogue as, I am immortal, I'm the devil. Or I think also you could it sort of alludes to his importance in history. He's so awful and so evil, literally, that he just transcends man, let's say, completely.
He's become an idea rather than a person.
Well, that's right, yeah. An idea is definitely the right way to say. He is literally an idea. And during the sequence, he helps kill the Apaches and becomes allies with Glanton. And I always remember the mindless rampage that this group, the judge and the kid, go on, and it ends eventually in disaster. And then the judge ends up hunting the kid, through, I want to say, these mines or this mine area, and he's like shouting at him and thrilling stuff, really thrilling, goading him, taunting him. Because the kid he's literally just a kid who's brought himself up. He speaks oddly. There's also that sequence earlier on in the novel where it's implied that the judge has a slave, a male sex slave. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
That's but foreshadowing there, I find personally. Well, maybe it's foreshadowing. I don't know, but because this is where we start talking about the grand theme of the novel, really, I suppose, which we'll get to soon. Because the novel ends years and years later, where the judge and the kid are reacquainted.
At this point, he's now become the man, hasn't he?
The man, exactly. He and McCarthy refers to him as the man, and their encounter ends with the death of the kid. The protagonist dies at the end. Would be the first time.
That ending was so. I don't want to use the word vague because there was definitely a lot of description of something happening.
No. No. It's completely vague. That's the thing. Even the narrator doesn't tell you what happened. It's an onlooker.
But there's interpretations that could be drawn.
Yes. Well, we keep making this is thematically such a strong text that everything is interpretable. Everything, and I keep saying about themes and how we're going to mention them, but that'll be in a moment. I just wanted to mention actually that the research McCarthy went into, because he read, did lots of research, but an important thing that he read was Samuel Chamberlain's My Confession, The Recollection of a Rogue, as Samuel Chamberlain supposedly rode with the Glanton gang between 1849 and 1850. And did you know that Judge Holden was actually a real person in this account?
I had heard he'd been based on someone real. Yeah.
Yes. Like everything else, though, everything is like an extension of reality, an extension of fact blown up.
Artistic license, yeah.
Yes, let's say, definitely artistic license. So you were saying about themes a second ago, like, what would you say then? What was you going to go on?
In what regard, sorry? With regards to...
We were talking about the ending.
Well, my first takeaway of that was that it was purely an act of violence. That something savage and violent...
He's found in the toilet, isn't he?
Yeah. There was descriptions of flesh and slamming against each other and being drawn in and things. However, it was on discussion with you afterwards that you suggested the possibility of there being another aspect to it.
Well, let me just go back, so I've got the book to hand. I've got it right to hand because he talks about hugging him, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. The judge was seated upon the closet. He was naked, and he rose up smiling, and gathered him in his arms against his immense and terrible flesh, and shot the wooden bar-ledge home behind him. And that's all you know, is that the naked judge comes out of the darkness and hugs the kid and locks the door. And then it's later that two men find
the remains.
The remains. That's right. That's right.
At that point, you're not sure if the kid's dead. If I remember, you don't. I don't.
It's not explained. It's not explained.
Yeah, it's just you're left to draw your own conclusions.
All you know is to say, okay, the first man watched him go and open the door. Good God Almighty, he said. What is it? He didn't answer. He stepped past the other and went back up the walk. The other man stood looking after him. Then he opened the door and looked in. That's it.
Yeah.
It's all you know. This has multiple connotations for me personally. Sorry, I didn't interrupt you. Did you have anything else to say there, by the way?
No, you carry on.
Yeah. Because of the foreshadowing of the judge's weird sexuality, I was under the impression that he raped the kid to death, the man to death. You know, I'm not sure if it's because of my upbringing, because of my age, but a man being raped by another man, you know, is a powerful image. It demasculates, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The victim completely, in a complete way. And I thought that was what the judge wanted, because he says to the kid several times through the novel that he's interested in him. You know, comments on him in the same way that he comments on everyone else. But I think what's even more interesting about this section of the novel is it's not what the judge is implied to have done. It's how McCarthy shows this ending. All the way through this novel, Mark, you are given absolute matter-of-fact level description of extreme violence. Is there anything more violent than the killing of children? Let's be honest. Maybe animals, but killing utterly defenseless children, you know, it doesn't get any more violent than that. And we are given that information and told it, matter of fact. And yet, when the protagonist of this novel is murdered, potentially, who knows, by the antagonist, he doesn't show us. He doesn't tell us what happened. He doesn't show us. Instead, we get someone's reaction. And all the way through this novel, these people have been this gang have been murdering Apaches, murdering indigenous Americans, murdering innocents without a care, not caring one bit. And yet, when the protagonist is killed at the end, we get, oh my God.
It's almost like the narrator couldn't bring themselves to describe what was witnessed.
Mm-hmm.
Which kind of sets in the light, was it worse than everything that had come before?
Absolutely. But I once read an essay about this book, and I can't remember it. Oh, I wish I could remember it. I've looked through it before. And they talked about how this is like a meta-commentary on the nature of violent fiction as well. That's why this novel is regarded often as an anti-Western. Because, you know, when we look at Westerns of the Golden Age, they're about cowboys heroically killing Indians, right?
Mm-hmm.
Often. Indigenous Americans, Native Americans, you know, the Americans that lived there in the first place. You know, this is where the Western was born. Colonialism. And what this novel is showing is the absolute awfulness of the violence that was committed. Because let's be honest, scalping itself is horrific, Mark, isn't it? The act of scalping someone to prove that you killed them is awful. and getting paid for it. Bounty hunters. It's just violence upon violence. And the interesting thing about the reaction of various readers to this novel, they find it horrific, awful. I accept that. Why would you write such a thing? How could you read such a thing? How could someone create something so awful? But I think that kind of opinion, I understand that, as I said, this is not a sort of novel you recommend to your mother. That's for sure. Definitely not. Or your nan, especially. That reminds me of that time when Dad was showing me and my brother Predator 2 when we were like 9 or something. And do you remember the first 10 minutes of Predator 2? The absolute violence was going on.
The gang war.
And like my nan walked in and saw us and went, oh my God, you can't show this to them. And she came in and turned it off. Me and my brother and my dad laughed about this for years afterwards. But I understand that people can say I can't enjoy reading this because it's too violent and it's too disturbing. But that is the point of the novel in the grand scheme of things, is that this is about the violence. It's not a book that is looking to vindicate violence. It's a book that's about the awfulness of violence. Many of McCarthy's books are about murderers and killers and bad people, let's say. But this book is about the awfulness of man. It doesn't get any more awful than what goes on in this book. It really doesn't. And it's a warning. It's a reminder. Personally, I can't say it was a book I enjoyed when I read it. But then at the same time, Mark, when you read and watch like disturbing stuff, can you say you enjoy it?
There's a certain morbid fascination that comes with reading and experiencing extreme violence or watching it. I mean, getting away from the likes of things like Saw, that sort of thing, where it's violence for the sake of violence. This was different. This was violence because it felt almost like a testimony.
Yes.
Of someone who was witnessing it, not because for the shock value of it and the characters in the story, because they are so far gone, they can't even stir up a reaction to a lot of the things they're witnessing. This is different to something like Saw or something like that. It's a much more like, I mean, there is the hypocritical nature of the fact that they are hunting savages, as they refer to them, when they are far more savage than them. And it is the hypocrisy that comes with that. The men because they simply do not see what they're doing as evil. They just see it as business.
It's expansion.
Yeah,
they're doing it because they're paid by the government to do it because the rest of the world are trying to colonize America and take it over steal it from the people that would rightfully live there. Which is a great crime in itself, really, isn't it? But there is something also to add to the meta commentary of this novel that I always found quite interesting, is that like all the way through the novel, as I mentioned, the violence is depicted for the reader, and yet the greatest moment of violence in the novel is left to the imagination of the reader. And I almost feel like that's McCarthy saying to the reader, you're the same. You who are reading this book, you might not be committing these acts in your daily life. Maybe you are a bad person, but it's in your head because I gave you the tools to imagine something awful for this character to have suffered at the hands of the judge at the end. And I think that's just genius. I've mentioned in the past, on past episodes, how I love it when authors use the novel in a metatextual way, where the novel is not just a bunch of words on a page. The novel is something, symbolic. It's like a talisman. It's for telling a story. It has as much power physically as do the words on the page, building this imagery in your mind. It's just incredible stuff. As I say, it's not really a book that you can recommend to anyone, but to admire, I suppose. It's a book about admiration. I've read it a few times. I suppose if you're the sort of person that is interested in villains, like a good villain, this is definitely worth reading.
It's a well fleshed out villain. A villain that, whilst you may not understand his motivations, you can't look away.
It's the characterization, isn't it? It's just the characterization, the dialogue and the action. To use the cliche, it just leaps off the page. But there's been a few film versions planned of this, Mark. Did you know?
I've heard stories of people wanting to attempt it, but
how could you? Well,
yeah,
I don't. It's unfilmable because of the violence. You wouldn't do it page for page, I suppose. But
I mean, who could play the judge?
It would have to be someone unknown.
I mean, in my mind, when I was reading the book, the person who I created in my mind as a visual wasn't too far removed from the Kurgan from Highlander.
Ah, that's interesting. Yeah, in the present time.
Yeah, in terms of that visualization, it was what kind of came to mind first in terms of a hairless behemoth of a man.
I never imagined him as masculine or as well built or muscled as the Kurgan, because the Kurgan looks like a very, a man who takes care of himself. Whereas I think the judge is described as being almost disgusting, not fat, but because he's tall, isn't he?
Not buff,
yeah, but kind of like large. I want to say bulbous, slimy. I don't know, a bit fatty. I can't really explain it. It's almost. You remember that? Do you remember the film Blade? Do you know the vampire that is like in that like swimming pool? Kind of like that almost, but a bit. That's kind of what the image. Yeah, the Kurgan's kind of there, but I sort of had that sort of image in my head.
Yeah.
A lot of people have interpreted the judge online in some great art. So I recommend looking. There's some great stuff out there.
I probably will actually, just to get to see other people's interpretations of the character.
You'll find you're quite close. You're quite on the money. But Tommy Lee Jones and Ridley Scott both had a go turning this into a film.
Was Tommy Lee Jones to be playing?
No, I just think he was looking to make it and maybe star in it. Yeah, man, he probably would have played one of the Grantons, I would have thought.
That'd make more sense. I can see him playing one of those roles.
Yeah. And James Franco made like a mini movie to sort of promote the idea of making it. It's out there somewhere. It's low budget. It's not great. Would you say it is unfilmable, personally?
Difficult to say. I mean, I'd never say that any story is unfilmable. I do think that with the right funding and the right passion, anything can eventually be transcribed to the silver screen. But this is something that would require. The thing is that the story itself is
not really a story there, mate. Let's be honest.
Yeah, it's not.
It's a series of events.
And what is there isn't necessarily going to be appealing to a large market.
How would you sell this? Like, a boy leaves town, then ends up being a scalper and kills lots of people, narrowly escapes murder, and then is murdered.
Yeah, I mean
that's the plot.
I mean, some of the scenes in this movie would, like, if you were to make this movie, it would be like, it would cause public outcry and backlash for the fact that you created these scenes.
I tell you, mate, Ridley Scott would have been a good choice for the visuals.
It would be a very controversial movie if it was ever made. I mean, I feel it's not so much the fact that the difficulty in filming the scenes, or maybe not even necessarily representing the characters. I think it's in finding a demographic, finding a market, finding an audience.
Westerns aren't even a thing anymore, really, are they?
It's a dead media. I mean, it's very rare that...
Dead genre, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, they've been overtaken by so many other types of genres. You rarely get Westerns today compared to, say, like in the 50s and the 60s.
Of course.
So they are a bit more of an event now when they are made. So
yeah, I suppose it's almost like Neuromancer in a way. Like, the film adaptation is kind of past the point of it being made. I still like the idea of seeing this, though. I think the Coens could do it. If Roger Deakins, especially, was the cinematographer for them for this one, for it, I reckon the Coens could do it.
Prove themselves in Westerns with true grit.
And No Country. Yeah. So that's Blood Meridian. This is one of my all-time favorite novels. It is. I believe I read it before Hemingway, so it is when I started to discover new methods of writing. Let's say new methods of prose composition. We'll get on to more of that in a second, though. So, anything else to say about this one, mate?
For me personally, whilst this doesn't fall into my favourite novels, I am glad that I read it. It was definitely an experience. Mainly because it was just about as far from my comfort zone as I could probably get, while still succeeding in finishing the book.
Let's put this into context, okay? In our introduction episode, you said that your favourite books are ones that are humorous.
Yeah.
And about 25 minutes ago, I said that this book was unfunny.
Mm-hmm. It was. The thing is, what I look for in a book, what keeps me reading. This book is thin on the ground for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, what I look for in a story and what you look for in a story are two very different things. It is slick with characterization of some of the characters, and in terms of painting a picture, this book does that in spades. It's just sometimes the shock was significant on certain scenes. Really
I think that obviously, aside from the extreme violence, it was the judge that kept me reading.
He was a hypnotic figure. He mesmerized. He was very difficult to look away from, and that is the thing that kept me reading.
Ironically, he had as much power over you and me reading it as he did over the people who he rode with. It is implied, isn't it, that his very presence is almost contributing to them going on this murderous rampage across the West.
He's charismatic. He's a tyrant. He's a warlord, and everything rolled into one. And
who could you cast? Who? I mean, one comparison I read it recently actually was a combination of Satan and Colonel Kurtz. From Apocalypse Now.
Yeah.
Marlon Brando could have played him. I think Marlon Brando could have played him, but I don't know.
In modern day times,
I just don't know. I'd have to really think about it and really look. So.
You'd have to have someone that has an edge unlike any other. So
they've got to have intelligence. That's the important thing, isn't it? They've got to have intelligence and chemistry.
Charisma.
Charisma is a better word for it. Yeah, it's intelligence and charisma. A commanding presence. I don't know. What a great character. Right then, so I think we should call it a break there, and then we'll be back in a second.
Okay, so welcome back, and in this segment we're going to start discussing about another one of Cormac McCarthy's books, specifically that was adapted into a movie, and that would be No Country for Old Men. Now, this was a 2007 movie directed by Joel and Ethan Coen, and I was, for the life of me, trying to remember exactly when it was I first saw this movie, because I've seen it a couple of times. I didn't see it when it came out initially. It was a thing that I caught later. Something that I believe I found it on streaming and watched it one night. And the first time I watched it, it blew me away. I had no concept of this movie, no hype, nothing.
Wow, how lucky are you?
And
wow, because one thing I do know about the release of the film is that it absolutely mystified audiences.
I can understand why. It's just, I mean, this is a movie that, well, for a start, it comes from Cormac McCarthy, who is considered to be one of the best authors, especially when it comes to the like of Americana, as we were discussing earlier. And it was directed by the Coens, who were coming off the back of a couple of rather flat movies that had not bombed, but hadn't been as well received. And this was them wanting to get back to their roots a little bit, considering these are the creators of the likes of Fargo, Miller's Crossing, The Big Lebowski, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou. They've got a very wide catalogue of movies that very much like to delve into the Midwest, the southern states of America, and explore the culture of both historical and present-day times. And this movie manages to appeal to both those elements at once. It essentially is a Western. However, it's a Western set in relatively modern times. I believe it's set in the 80s.
Yes.
And made on a budget of 25 million. Worldwide, it made 171 million. It was a massive success. It won 76 awards from its 109 nominations, including 4 Oscars, for one including Best Picture, 2 Golden Globes, and 3 British Academy of Field Awards. It's a very interesting movie. It's another one. It's much in the same fashion as The Judge. This movie, it can be somewhat hypnotizing to watch. You do find yourself drawn into the characters, and you find yourself unable to look away as to what's going to happen to them. And this story, it has 3 main characters. Now, I'm not going to introduce these in appearance order because I want to save the best for last. But firstly, there's Tommy Lee Jones playing Ed Tom Bell, who's a weathered sheriff. You can see he's getting towards the end of his career. He has seen some things. He has become more and more, not cynical, but he is very worn down by the day-to-day life and of the things he's witnessed. And you can see he's starting to understand less and less the violence and the viciousness he sees in people that are committing crimes. And at times, all he wants to do is just understand the world, but he is still very much a methodical man who wants to do good. Now, as opposed to this would be Josh Brolin, who plays Llewellyn Moss, who's a Vietnam vet who has the unfortunate luck, if you can call it that, of stumbling across a failed drug trade wherein just about everybody's been gunned down, and he comes across a case that contains $2.4 million. Now, he does what most people would do in this situation, which is he takes the money and runs. But unfortunately, a certain aspect of his good nature is what dooms him in this story, in that he goes back to the shootout area because one man wasn't quite dead and was begging for water. And I feel that initial choice kind of defines that there is good in him, that he was willing to risk his life, but unfortunately it sets in motion a chain of events, which leads to the introduction of the 3rd main character. This is Javier Bardem, playing Anton Chigurh. Now, this character's interesting.
He's not a sweet man, that's for sure.
Every moment he is on the screen, you are almost waiting. And he is one of the first characters you're introduced to in this story because you get to see an interaction with him when he gets arrested.
Yes.
He gets pulled over by a police officer and taken back to the police station where he's booked. And you just see a moment where the officer's speaking on the telephone, and behind him, Chigurh stands up, strides over to him purposefully, then loops his handcuffed wrists over the guy's neck and pulls back tight, throttling him. And the camera draws in close, and you see the look on his face. And it's very difficult to describe the expression. It's not quite joy. It's not quite anger. It's something else. It's very disturbing. And as this is going on, you hear the sound of a train hammering through the audio, as if to suggest that this character is relentless. He's unstoppable. And this transfers further into the story as you realize that at every moment, he has got full control of the situation and he can't be stopped. That he is on a track and his focus is to get the money back that Llewellyn Moss has now done a runner with.
But he's a sociopath, isn't he?
Yes.
He's like completely and totally without remorse. Doesn't care.
No, he purely just...
He has a thing to do, and he's going to do it. And it doesn't matter who's in his way. He's going to do everything in his power to do it.
Yes. And this is what makes him so interesting to watch. I mean, for the majority of the movie, he's armed with 2 very specific weapons as well. The first would be a Remington 1187 silent shotgun. Now, this weapon doesn't actually exist in the real world. It's something that was created purely for the movie.
For the book.
Yeah.
Same as the book.
That's one thing, actually, that the Coens admitted, is that when they were actually writing this movie, they said it was one of the easiest movies they've ever had to transcribe.
Yeah, it's almost the same.
Yeah.
It's almost the same. Well, originally he wrote it as a film, didn't he?
Yeah, he started as a screenplay, it's true.
Yeah, because he was doing screenplays and whatnot, so... Yeah.
The only thing they said, the only difficulty was in deciding what not to put in.
Yeah.
Because, they said he just made it very easy for them. Yeah,
it's a novel in the end, isn't it? You can't get everything in there unless it's like 100 pages long.
And there's something savage about a silent shotgun. It's hard to explain why. It doesn't feel surgical. It feels very brutal whilst being very quiet.
In the end, with a shotgun, it's the pellets that spray that damage you, isn't it? That hurt you, that wound you, and it's multiple little wounds all at once. And it's awful. The way it's portrayed in the film, it's reminiscent, I would say, actually, of the prose in the novel. But anyway, sorry, carry on.
But then moving on to his second weapon is an air compressed bolt gun. Which its history actually lies, it's usually utilised on cattle farms to stun cattle before you slaughter them. And he puts this to great effect at times, not just as a tool of execution, but also it becomes a bit of a calling card when you realise he uses it to shoot locks out from doors. On one occasion, it's shown to indicate his presence in a scene prior to his reveal. It's a really ominous, very weird weapon, but at the same time, it's utterly savage and it's intimidating as all hell. There are a couple of times when you see him execute people with it where they just stand there utterly confused as he slowly levers up the bolt gun to the forehead, with them trying to work out what is he doing, by which point it's already far too late. Now, this story is a cat and mouse thriller with him pursuing Llewellyn, with Tommy Lee Jones not far behind, witnessing the carnage that's occurring between the two of them. Even though they don't actually interact that much, there is a couple of moments where their paths cross, where the violence explodes. For instance, there's a sequence, I think it lasts about 5 to 10 minutes, about halfway through the movie, where Sugar catches up with him.
It's interesting you say that, right? Because they don't actually really come face to face, though, do they?
No.
Not really. Like, they're sort of behind cover, shooting each other and running away and diving around cover. There's not really, like, a specific moment where they actually come face to face with each other and talk, let's say, and threaten each other.
There's only one moment, which is during a telephone conversation.
A telephone call,
Yes, which is a little later on. However, it is very strange to have a protagonist and antagonist have so little interaction, whilst at the same time having the story driving them towards each other so much.
I wouldn't say that the story's driving them together.
Well, one of them's trying to drive away.
That's right. Llewellyn is doing everything he can to get away, and as you say, is that train sound, isn't it? He is literally like a relentless
barreling down the tracks towards him.
Freighter, it doesn't, and it just everything is, in its way is just swatted aside.
And this movie, it's very drawn out. There are sequences where there's not much talking. It is purely just in the facial expressions and the eyes of the protagonists and the antagonists. I mean, all three of these men are all very quiet, thoughtful men. You can see the cogs turning at different times for each of them as they consider their circumstances and how best to take advantage and how best to get away or to obtain their goals. And it's interesting to watch. It's just seeing them all slowly shift around each other, sometimes coming close but not quite. For instance, a sequence where Sugar's driving down the road just with the tracker until it slowly starts to pip. And you see him just use it to triangulate on where it is this money is. Because unfortunately, the money that was stolen does have a transponder in it, which Josh Brolin realizes almost too late. Not quite, but almost. Which leads to the beginning of that shootout, starting of him sat on a bed in a motel room with the light switched off, staring at the light ebbing from underneath the door and seeing the silhouette of someone's shoes stood on the other side of the door. And this is a movie of tension. This is one where it ramps it up until the final release. And it does deliver in that regard. It's an anxiety attack at times in terms of just seeing how far they can hold the note before they finally let it go. I will say, though, that this is a movie that it contradicts your expectations as to where you think the story is going to go.
It subverts tropes of the genre repeatedly.
Absolutely. I mean,
the book's the same.
This is the thing. It's just a story like this that starts off with these two characters slowly orbiting each other, but never quite meeting at times, coming close, but not always. You'd expect to build to a final climactic face-off where the two of them, I don't know, tossing catchphrases back and forth, I don't know, some sort of dialogue or some sort of fight, some sort of besting or something to that tune. But that's not what happens here. In actual fact, the main character, Josh Brolin, gets killed off screen. It's only once Tommy Lee Jones eventually manages to catch up with him at a motel that he walks up to find that a random other gang that's been roped into this storyline that's also hunting the money that have been hired as well as Shiger have caught up with him and have executed him. And it makes you feel like you've taken a misstep at the end of the movie. It's almost a jolt to the senses to realise the story's not going to go the way you think it's going to go. And after that, you think, where does the story go from here? And it slowly leads into the ending. And it's at this point I'd like to address two specific scenes that I feel define the main character. Well, I say main character, I define Shiger. Now, Javier Bardem is an intimidating man in this movie. He is calm, he's measured. Every time he's talking, he's never giving you anything more than what he thinks you need to know. He's also a man which does apparently have ethics. At first, it could be easy to write him off as a sociopath who's just killing people. But that's not really what he is. He does have a sense of justice of sorts, but it's not in line with what you'd expect from a police officer or anything like that. I mean, this is best attributed by the sequence close to the beginning where he drops in at a Texaco petrol station. And he stands opposite the owner. Now, at this point, the thing that causes him not to snap, but just suddenly decide that he wants to focus on him, is this man asking how the weather was from where he'd come from. And in that moment, you see his eyes shift. And he focuses absolutely on the clerk and starts questioning him on who he is and what sort of life he leads, wherein the man admits to having married into a business. And something about this, you can see he almost finds it offensive. He's almost angered by the man. That this man isn't something he's earned himself, it's something he's just gained from marrying into a family. And with this, he responds by making him choose, by taking a coin out and demanding that he choose head or tails, asking him how much has he ever lost on the flip of a coin. At this point, you realise that the clerk still has no fucking idea exactly how dangerous a person he is speaking to, but you can see that he has an inkling that all is not well. And to his credit, and it's probably the only safe move to make in this, is he chooses a side, and he turns out to be successful. At which point you notice that Shiger's demeanour changes slightly, where he congratulates him. And he offers him the coin, at which point the man goes to almost shift it into his pocket when he goes, no, don't put it in your pocket. It'll get mixed in with your other change. You keep that. That's a trophy now. That's a representation that the universe decided that you were okay to live today, that you earned your life. And I feel this is kind of a moment where you realise that Shiger is a man that when he sees anything that falls within his realms of injustice or he feels doesn't fit into the world, he turns to the universe and asks it, should I remove this man from creation? Does this man deserve to live? Almost like he's detaching himself from the decision. He doesn't want to make these decisions. And there's a line he says on more than one occasion, which is, this is the best I can do. Wherein he makes a concession. He allows a slight shift in the negotiation. Almost as if he's trying to relay that the rules he's working within aren't his own. That he's offering the best he can, but there are rules, and the rules have to be followed. They can be bent, but they can't be broken.
If you remember, he compares his very presence in that petrol station to the coin itself.
I've traveled 22 years. Yeah.
He compares himself to the coin. and basically says that this coin has traveled this far up until this point, and now it's going to make the decision for me. Blah 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 blah. And there is like a synergistic perspective, I think, there. I'm not really sure if he believes in like a greater power or that he is like intentionally like I don't know, believing in luck. I think it's more about the survival of the fittest, this evolution, the natural order of things, you know, which I think is actually part of the part of the overarching themes of the story. To be honest with you, evolution of man, evolution of man's nature. Anyway, sorry.
No, absolutely. I mean, he is a man which is a lot of interpretations can be taken from him. I mean, he is. You can see that he clearly does believe in the aspect of survival of the fittest. He does. He is a very strong man who is willing to do anything to survive. I mean, down to that sequence where he gets injured and he just very matter-of-factly resolves it by setting fire to a car outside a pharmacy, specifically as a distraction, so he can walk in and take these things he needs, so that he can work on his wounds, his injuries. And he's, for the most part, he's emotionless. However, there are times when he does get angry, when he does look offended, when people are talking to him during the negotiation for their lives, when they're begging for him not
to... yeah, this is what I was getting at with like survival of the fittest. It's like about the strong, isn't it? Because he does. It's hard to explain because the performance is so subtle, and in the book is written very sparsely. This was the start of his like real McCarthy's real attempt to embrace the simplistic narrative, sparse style, so the iceberg style, shall we say,
allowing you to interpret.
Yeah, simplistic on the surface, but lots of hidden meaning underneath. And like, I feel that Chigurh is a character who is active. He has agency. He takes charge. He makes decisions, and he does everything of his own accord. You know, he is at the top of the evolutionary chain, let's say, because he is willing to make the decisions. He is willing to put the first foot forward. He's willing to pull the trigger. He's willing to take charge of his own life. And I think this is also mirrored because he almost has a bit of respect for Moss, doesn't he? He almost feels there's a justice idea about Moss inconveniencing him, isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
That moment he mentions is that, which you're going to get to very soon, I'm sure. But I do feel like there's a degree of like mutual, like a degree of respect on his part. And like compared to the petrol station clerk, what angers him specifically, well, this is that he's someone who's just fallen into his life.
He hasn't taken control.
No, he married into his money, and that I think is, aside from his own sense of morality and justice, I think that is kind of what twists him into making him make that choice, because he never made a choice in his life. Does he not say that to him as well?
No, and what do I put up? And it's like, you've been putting it up for your entire life. And
exactly. Exactly. And he makes him finally make a choice in his life. It's whether to live or die. He forces someone who has had no agency and he's been given everything in his life. I mean, you know, is Chigurh a criminal because of convenience, or is it nature versus nurture? It's never explained. You're never told what his origin story
is or anything.
Exactly. You don't know.
Just purely a mechanism for him to remove himself from the decision of killing these people, or does he have more belief in it than that?
You don't know. You have to infer it yourself in the end. You know, it's interesting. It's very interesting, complex, very complex. When you think about it, on the surface, it's not. It seems just
it's just a sociopath playing with his food.
Literally.
But as I say, there are levels in which you can interpret it. You can interpret it to level. Maybe I'm looking too deeply into it, but it certainly does suggest.
No, you're not. No, I mean, why does someone pull the wings off a fly? Why?
Because they want to watch it writhe in pain.
What exactly? Why? And that is what a sociopath is. You know, there's no connection with humanity whatsoever. You know, and it's almost like he's testing he's taking pleasure in testing him. The fact that he speaks to him in the first place is what causes the entire scenario, isn't it? And like, if he had not said anything in the first place out of politeness, maybe the entire scene wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, it is literally him probing a touch too far into asking him where he'd come from. That it's almost like he takes offence to that you've overstepped. And now
I'm not sure if it's that. I'm not sure if it's that he's overstepped. You know, I'm not sure. I think it comes down to that pulling the
where he just
pulling the wing of a fly.
Like you suddenly you came onto my radar sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. I think he was just oblivious to him, and then the moment he spoke to him, oh hello, and then they talk, and it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse for him, and that's when he says, "Call it." You know, that classic line.
Yes.
You know, call it. You've been putting it up your whole life. So, yes. Anyway, sorry.
As I say, the story does progress throughout. With just before Moss, before he is executed, does have a conversation with Sugar. At which point, Sugar announces that he's going to go find his wife, unless he comes to him with the money right now. He even says to him that he's going to die if he comes, but then he'll leave his wife alone. And Moss turns him down on that offer. And because this is a man of his word, despite the fact Moss is dead, he follows through on that. And this leads to the penultimate scene of the movie, wherein Moss's wife, Carla Jean, comes to a home to where she's hiding throughout the events of this, wherein she's scarpered because he's told her to get out of town, and finds Sugar waiting for her. And there is an interesting conversation that incites this. Now, this scene doesn't give you too much. It gives you just enough to infer what happens. But there is a conversation that occurs just prior in which I'm going to paraphrase it, but essentially it was her saying, "You don't have to do this." And he goes, "Okay, this is the best I can do." And then he produces the coin and says, "Call it." So, "No, I ain't going to call it." He goes, "Call it." So the coin don't have no say. It's just you. Now that scene is left open, followed immediately by the sequence of him leaving the house. Now, there's a couple of subtle hints here to imply that he has just brutally murdered her. But they didn't need to show anything. Everything that led up to that, all of the sequences you've seen of this man prior to this, in the way in which he acts, he never lets someone live if they've seen him. He doesn't like to leave traces. He's not a man of loose ends. He very much ties up all the knots. You know that the fact that he actually made the journey all the way there suggests that he intended to finish her.
Yeah, I kind of feel like he threatened Moss to try and get the money. And Moss thought that he could, deal with it and not give him the money. And I think that it was a bluff almost, I feel like he just wants the money. He wants to get it. I'm telling you now, like he threatened his wife in an attempt to get him to give the money up. And then when he's died anyway, again, it's back to that morality, isn't it?
Well, he gave his word. I
gave my word.
Yeah, this is what I said I was going to do, and I'm going to do it.
I'm going to do it. This is justice, because you did this. You killed him, not me.
Yeah,
I'm just the
messenger.
Exactly.
And I feel
she says that to him. She says it's not a coin. It's you. I'm not going to call it. If you're going to kill me, then you need to decide to do it. And then you don't know, do you? Did he do it or not? Did he flip the coin or not? You just don't know. I can't remember in the book, to be honest with you, off the top of my head. I think it's vague as well.
Yeah. And the implication is that Sugar ended up with the case full of money. It's a very vague, solid implication. It's only based on the fact that when Tommy Lee Jones goes to the hotel room where Moss was murdered, he looks over and notices that the ventilation duct has been removed using a coin, which is the same fashion of which Shigeru removed a ventilation cover in another hotel, which is where Moss was hiding the money when he was staying in hotels. It's not an outright statement, although I do believe that in the novel it confirms that, yes, he did obtain the money.
Right, sorry to interrupt you. In the book, he kills her.
I see.
It's explicitly stated.
I feel leaving it vague is better. Because it doesn't need anything more than the dialogue that occurs beforehand. I think there is one little touch as he's leaving the house. He checks the soles of his boots.
Yes, which is something that he does earlier because of walking through blood.
Yes. And it's just that little touch is this all it's needed to suggest that there is a puddle of blood in there.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. There's also a very brutal sequence right at the end where he gets in a car crash. And it comes out of the blue. I mean, for a second, you almost think that Tommy Lee Jones was caught up with him. No, we're going to get our face off. We're going to finally see the two of them fight. No, it is just an accident. And he climbs out the car, sits on the curbside, realizes that the bone's sticking out of his arm. And he gets approached by two kids, one of which he manages to convince to give him his shirt in exchange for money. Then he calmly ties the sling around his neck and walks off. And that's the end. And that's one of the most unsettling parts about this movie, is that this is not a movie where justice prevails, where karma finds the people that deserves it or anything. It is simply a story. It is a Western. And sometimes the good guys don't win. And that's what made this so mesmerizing for me. It was just such an interesting story. It wasn't an adventure. It wasn't a caper or anything like that. It is purely just a story of people and their nature. Whether it be finding a case of money and running as fast as you can to enjoy the money and doing whatever you can to keep it, or a man whose morals are almost unknowable. What did you think of this movie, man?
Are you asking me what my overall opinion of the movie is, or are you asking me about the themes?
About the themes.
So, there are two ideas in this novel, because there is only one protagonist in this story, in my opinion, and that is Tommy Lee Jones's character. It's his journey that is the most important. It's just that Anton Chigurh is a villain, and Moss is a catalyst for his journey. There's an interpretation I read a little while ago actually about this, which I'll explain first, which is the simpler, less interesting one, is that Anton Chigurh is actually a ghost of his past, and he's chasing his past, the ghost. For example, this correlates to the scene where they nearly meet, don't they? When Anton Chigurh,
the murder scene.
When Anton Chigurh is waiting in the hotel room after killing Moss.
Yeah.
And then he goes, and then Tommy Lee Jones's character goes, and even though he's in there, he opens it and he's not in there, and the room's empty.
Mm.
It's like he's a ghost. And then there's the car crash, and he gets away like a ghost. You know, no one actually sees him really. Most people that see him die. You know, which I say is less interesting. But what is the true subtext of this? It's about the evolution of the criminal, the American criminal. Have you heard this one?
No.
Yeah, it's about the evolution of the American criminal and the inability of American law to keep up with it. Tommy Lee Jones's character is representative of the good old boys, the good old sheriffs from the cowboys back in the day, you know, who fire their guns, kill the killers, lock everyone up, and it's all good and done. But Anton Chigurh represents a new breed of criminal, the sociopathic criminal, the drug-related criminal, where it's not over just robbing banks There are just dealings and dealings. You know, it's corporate because he's hired. You know, and other people are hired. He's hired to do it, isn't he? Then he kills people that hired him, and he goes on and on and on and on. And there are multiple situations where Tommy Lee Jones just explains that he just can't believe what's going on. He's completely befuddled by it.
He's trying to understand this new generation, I suppose, or new breed.
Yeah, yes. And that's why he retires. Because he realizes he's old.
Yeah.
He can't keep up.
I mean, you say you feel he's the protagonist. He is a very uninvolved protagonist. It's almost
in terms of the themes of the novel. I mean, okay, and the book. Obviously, Moss's character, he's an ex-Vietnam vet. He's younger than Tommy Lee Jones's character. And he is shown to be a very, very resourceful man. He is shown to be someone who is able to look after himself. Obviously, he's a Vietnam vet as well. But he's also told that he can't survive. He can't keep up with Sugar because Sugar's a new breed.
Yeah.
Now, if I remember correctly, at the end of the novel, he goes and speaks with, is it his brother? Tommy Jones's character speaks with his brother who was wounded. And he says to him, I can't deal with this kind of criminal. I've never seen anything like it. And then his brother, whoever it is, says, well, no, this kind of person's been around forever.
It's only now that we're starting to see it more and more.
Yeah, that's right. They're coming out, you know. So, I always found that really powerful because as we were discussing about his morality, it's almost untouchable. We don't understand it. How can we comprehend that kind of morality, putting someone's life on a fucking coin? It's insane. It's madness.
Yeah.
You're completely mad.
This isn't like Two-Face in Batman or something like this. This feels much more... It's hard to explain. It's almost like he's...
I go back to pulling the wings off a fly.
Yeah.
Why would someone do this? It's because he is a monster. He is unknowable. That's what makes him so scary, so terrifying. In the book, right, after all the blood and the gore of Blood Meridian, right, I mean, you've not read the book, but as you know, the book is written like a script. It was a script that turns into a novel. It is written so simplistically, it is almost funny. Not funny, it's funny. It's amazing how simplistically it's written. For example, Woody Harrelson, right, the bounty hunter who is sort of following them as well, and Sugar corners him, right, and they sit down and they have that chat, and Harrelson realizes that his life's on the line. And Sugar, they have that conversation, and you don't see him shoot Woody Harrelson. It's quite horrific because you hear him the way he does. But all the other times he shoots people in the story, he just goes bang, 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 carries on bang, bang, bang. It's not like hyper violent, hyper action, anything like that. It's just he's just doing a job.
Yeah, matter of fact. I mean, it literally occurs whilst the phone is ringing. That you can, as the phone rings, you can see him just look at the phone and then. Just as almost like an afterthought, he executes him.
Every single time he shoots someone in the book, Cormac McCarthy describes it thus. And he shot him. That's it. Shot him. Not, and he lifted up the pistol and aimed down the sights and gently squeezed the trigger and the bullet, and then blah, 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 blah. And he shot him. That's it. Nothing else. Don't need anything else.
Because it's almost from his perspective of like, and I shot the guy. It's not like he's going to start dressing it up in artistic words.
Of course not. Of course not. It's matter of fact. Simple, effective in the sense that it just paints that picture, but also is representative of the character, exactly as you said, because it is just a job to him. It makes him so fucking terrifying because he is literally just bang, carried on, bang, carried on, bang, carried on.
Do a little bit of research. Whilst I haven't read the book, I did read about a scene that occurred in the book after all it's said and done that wasn't in the movie.
I can't remember. You have to remind me.
It's where Sugar goes back to his employer with the money and walks into his office and explains to him that it's no longer 2.4 million, it's closer to 2.3. Some of the money was lost, some of it went to cover my expenses.
Mm-hmm. And
his employer turns around to him and says, You're giving this back to me. You could have disappeared with this money and I wouldn't have been none the wiser. He goes, No, I'm a professional. And I'm intending to become a more prolific professional, and part of that is in establishing the fact that I am a reliable employee even.
Employee, yeah.
And there's something really terrifying about a guy that, whilst on the one hand is this monstrous, violent, unrelenting force of nature, whilst at the same time sees himself as almost like a corporate.
Well, when I say he's a monster, I don't mean like in the sense that he's a violent monster. I mean he's a monster because he's unknowable. He's almost alien.
And that, extra dimension of hearing about that scene, it almost flies in the face of everything you've seen before. But at the same time, it almost enhances it as well. Because
it enhances it completely. Because in the end, okay, it's his moral code. He's doing a job, and that's it. He's completely emotionless and unattached from murdering all these people. Apart from his
the money doesn't sway him. He doesn't see any value in that money or taking it. He is purely. That's not part of what he's looking for in life.
I could do reading the book again, actually, because he shoots what appears to be his employer at the beginning of the film. So is that scene new?
Oh, no, I think it's one of the guys that hired him. Because it's the same guy that hired the Mexicans, wasn't it? That's why he executes him in his office.
Yeah,
and that's when he walked in, and the accountant stood there as well.
No, that's the guy that hired. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. So that is added. They changed it.
Yeah. But the guy that's actually responsible for the ransom money and everything like that, I think he's a step above him or something.
Okay, yeah. Well, yeah. So that's in terms of the themes and stuff. That's just pretty much. It's quite tightly, neatly represented, in my opinion. It is very much another anti-Western.
Yeah.
It's almost like, for example. Let's talk about Scarface for a second. The kind of violence in Scarface, the kind of criminal in Scarface, Tony Montana as a criminal is, although you get a sense of his upbringing, with the drugs and the money that are involved, it's a far cry from the poor person robbing the liquor store. It's taken to the extreme.
No, the desire for power, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's what Scarface is about. Scarface is obviously about power and how it absolutely corrupts and whatnot. But Sugar hasn't even got interested in power.
That's not what drives him. Yeah.
No, but what drives him is the fact it's a job. Mm-hmm. And that's it. And he's absolutely going to do that job remorselessly. So is he a sociopath?
Absolutely.
or is he just absolutely that professional?
This is the thing, is that there are times when people do try to convince him not to do the job, and that's the only times you really see emotion on his eyes. And it is almost a look of offence at, how dare you tell me not to do my job? It's almost an anger. That's the points when you do start to see, when people obstruct him from being able to complete the job. That's the only time you really see any sort of emotion in his eyes.
I think having less about him being employed in the film definitely changes the interpretation of him.
Yeah, it seems that's what you say when he's almost like a ghost. He's almost sort of like...
Yeah, that's why I say it's more about Tommy Lee Jones's journey, let's say.
Just witnessing the fact that a person like this exists.
Yeah, exactly.
And where it is he originates from.
And that's like talking about how this story subverts tropes as well, because it hasn't got, as you mentioned earlier on, you don't have the defined antagonist and protagonist, and they go through their journey, the hero's journey, let's say, Hero 1,000 Faces, etc., meet in the end, have to face off. As you say, Moss is killed off screen. He's not the protagonist.
Yeah.
You
realise you've just been...
And he's not even killed by Sugar. He's killed by the Mexicans, isn't he? Because of Kelly MacDonald, ironically from Trainspotting, the Scottish woman from Trainspotting, ironically putting on an amazing American accent. What the hell? That's the one who Ewan McGregor sleeps with.
Yeah.
The schoolgirl.
I thought I recognised her.
Weird.
Yeah.
I mean, where the hell did you come from?
Yeah.
Yes, it's her mum, isn't it, that gives the game away by accident.
Oh, when she's talking to the Mexican in a suit.
Yeah.
I don't see many Mexicans in suits around here. It's like, my God.
Stop. No.
Yeah, you can just see you can see the parts falling into place, and that it doesn't mean anything good for anyone.
No.
And
they say, in the end, this is a world now that has... I think we all can understand Tommy Lee Jones's character. I think as we get older, we all start to feel a bit out of control. like we've lost control on the world. Like, I mean, this. I don't want to date the podcast, but like, if today you look at the gender-based politics that occur, and how young people today are embracing it for good or for ill, like, to me, it's so far removed from what's important to me. You know.
I mean, I fully understand. In terms of that, I've always been very much a person of live and let live, and however someone wants to define or view themselves, I will absolutely 100% support that. It's just unfortunate. I do sometimes require some form of education to understand.
But all these people going mad about it, how like feminism has gone the way it's gone in mainstream media as well, is just like befuddling to me. You look at homophobia. In the last, like, homophobia is still there, but it's not as bad as I would say it was in my father's age.
We were younger,
yeah. Racism as well, obviously, is bad still, but in my circles, it's not that bad, and it's not. But again, it's changed. But when I look back and think about my nan and realize that they were probably really racist, and to me that is impossible to believe, shows how much the social world we live in has evolved.
Yeah.
You know, and that's also what Tommy Lee Jones' character goes through. He's old now, and the world's passed him by, and it's time to let it go, get off the train, and sit down and retire.
Yeah, his ideas
can't keep up anymore.
No longer apply.
They don't. That's right. The criminal that he's chasing, he doesn't exist anymore, because the criminal that's at the heart of this movie is far more violent and far more destructive.
Yeah.
You know, because it's a professional.
It's almost, it's not like you can even punish him for it, because he will not see.
No, he'll come out and do it again and carry on working.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, you know. So yeah.
I will say that as a final little sort of like slightly more light tone for this podcast is that hairstyle.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say that I've seen a couple of interviews in preparation for understanding this, and it's hilarious to see the Coens go, "Oh yeah, Javier, he absolutely loved the hairstyle. Yeah, he thought it was brilliant." Then it smash cuts to Javier goes, I fucking hated it.
It's the worst hairstyle in the history of film.
But he said that having that hairstyle actually lent a little to his performance, in terms of a man that would have a hairstyle like that. It just shows how little he cares about what people think of him. God. It looks like a page boy from the 19th century or something, like medieval times or something. But they said they got their inspiration from a picture of a 70s photograph of someone from a brothel or something like that. They just saw a picture and they went, "That's a great hairstyle. We should get Javier to wear that." And he said, "Yeah, I had it for 3 months. It was terrible." But yeah, as I say, this movie is arguably one of the Coens' best.
I would agree with that. I'd probably say Pound for Pound is their best.
Yeah, I mean, they have got a couple that could be taken from their catalogue that can be held up as exceptionally good movies for different reasons, whether it be Fargo. I mean, I know the Lebowski's still got a lot of its fans, but that's probably liked by a different demographic to this one, purely for its comedy chops
and because it's not me. Yeah. I did not fan that movie, never been. But yeah, it's what it is.
And you were a fan of Miller's Crossing, weren't you?
Love Miller's Crossing, yeah. Love it. It's the remake of Dashiell Hammett novel, classic pulp novel. It's great.
And I've always had a lot of love for Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? I mean,
it's all right. It's all right.
It's a fun movie. I mean, I'm not going to say it's their best movie, but it was fun.
It's got John Turturro in it. Immediately gets at least 7 points.
He does elevate wherever he's in, doesn't he? Despite the fact I haven't read the book, I feel that this movie was fantastic. I don't know how much of it was removed in terms of the book. I understand it was compressed.
Yeah, just take it on its own terms. Just don't say it's a good adaptation, because you can't say that because you've not read the book. You just say it's a great movie. Just say it's a great movie. It's all you got to do.
That's what I was leading to. I was saying in a more wordy fashion. Okay, start again then. Okay.
I might keep it all in just for humour, to be honest with
you. Fair enough.
Look, let's just finish it now.
Yeah, this was a good movie.
It's a great movie. It's a great movie. It's a great movie, and it deserved everything it got. And it upset a lot of people, and I love a film that upsets people. I love it.
Yeah, sometimes those are the ones that aren't afraid to buck tradition.
I need to read the book, man. Actually, I'm really interested in reading it.
I will say, rewatching the movie and then doing some research about some of the scenes around it has actually made me want to read that book.
I'd recommend it. It's great. It's great. I read the book first, but this is like 10 10, 15 years ago when I read it, probably. So I do need to reread it.
Yeah.
Cool. So I suppose we're at this point now where I should detail what we're going to be covering in the next episode. Do you remember, Mark? Because we have actually planned it now.
I will be honest, I read the entire roadmap, but I forget what the next one was.
The next one is a video games based episode. I am going to be talking about my favorite non-fighting game of all time, and that is Nintendo's classic Super Metroid.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about what you're going to do.
Oh, that part, no worry. Okay, and me, myself, I'm going to be doing a bit of an analysis of the Stanley Parable.
Oh, that's a great game. Looking forward to hearing that.
Yes, I mean, if within the loosest terminology of what a game is, it's an interesting experience.
Well, that's it. The podcast is finished. You can follow me at writer GM Groves on Twitter, X, Facebook, and Instagram. Mark, tell them where anyone can follow you.
On Gav stuff, because I'm not really on social media. So, yeah.
You need to say something like nowhere.
I like to live off the grid, man. Seriously. I mean, back in the day, setting up an Xbox Live ID was a big move for me.
So if you want to read my work, check out my website. It's in the podcast episode description. There you'll find articles, reviews, fiction here and there. And without further ado, I shall bid you farewell, and hopefully we will see you soon.
Catch you later.
Staring back at me, I'm a dead man walking. I'm a dead man walking. I'm a dead man. Another nail in my coffin, another nail for me. I gotta look pretty when I go down.